Excellent. This is Josh Hollander, and I'm pleased today on this episode of the InsurTech Leadership Podcast to be joined by Kurt Diederich, CEO and co-founder of Finis. Finis builds the core systems that property and casualty insurers run on, policy administration, billing, and claims. And Kurt has been building that platform for 25 years. This conversation is important right now because most carriers have stopped asking whether AI works and started asking why so little of it ever makes it out of the pilot. Kurt's argument is that the constraint stopped being the technology a while ago, and what decides whether any of it works is business process, organizational readiness, and whether leadership plans pass the pilot. Welcome, Kurt.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So, if you don't mind, having been in the industry for the time you have, maybe you could just walk through in a little bit more detail your background leading up to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I got my start when I was very young. A kid just programming assembly language games on various computers that probably a lot of people haven't even heard of, but the TRS-80 or Trash 80, as some people called it, the Coco, the Apple IIs and whatnot. And started that as a teenager and obviously didn't have the internet. We're selling the games at the back of magazines, cassettes and whatnot. So enjoyed computers throughout my high school career and pretty much personal computers. Then when I went to college, I worked my way through college as a consultant, and then got started in business straight out of college. So I've pretty much been an entrepreneur my entire life. In 2001, we formed Finis and went all in on insurance. And we've dabbled in a few other industries, but I liked insurance. I thought that it was deep enough. There's enough complexity to keep it interesting. And it had a great need for modernization. A lot of carriers were having a lot of problems getting onto the web back at that time. And that's really where we got our start, was developing very forward-looking user interfaces for that. So today, actually in 2026, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary.
Great. And did the business start as like a pure services business and evolve into a product business, or any more detail you can share on that?
Sure. Well, in the 90s, we did a lot of consulting and just various technical type things for insurance carriers. We built just a claims solution. It was actually built on a product called Fourth Dimension, which was an Apple product. It was a 4GL, which was popular at the time. And I didn't think that, your typical carriers would be willing to adopt a Mac-based platform. And it was ultimately rolled out to the PC, but it wasn't scalable. So we had a lot of experience before we started Finis in that general area. And, so claims was our specialty. And then we moved into policy and distribution channels in 2001, and decided to build the entire platform on Microsoft.NET technology. And for those that might be curious about a little trivia, basically Microsoft.NET was a successor to a product made by Borland, and they hired away a lot of the architects from Borland to build .NET to compete with Java. So those are your two big technology platforms. My opinion is you could do pretty much anything you'd want in either one of them. They're both great platforms. The reason we like the Microsoft technologies more was because there's just a wider development community for that and some of the other technologies and platforms.
Got it. So as someone who kind of went through that .com transformation, or organizations trying to figure out how to leverage the internet, and I've heard different opinions with what's going on with AI right now as to whether it's a lot of the same issues, or if it's different because of the different nature of the technologies and the issues that are faced. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a skeptic. Maybe a lot of people are when they look at AI. In 2000, you had the Y2K problem and you had the .com thing going. And the Y2K thing, I think there was a lot of fear and uncertainty about how everything was absolutely going to shut down. I know of companies that bought pallets and pallets of water because they didn't think they would get water and whatnot. Obviously, none of that came true. The date kind of flipped over to 2000. It all worked. The .com bubble, I think a lot of people are familiar with. The stock market's went absolutely wild. The NASDAQ peak to trough dropped almost, I think it dropped more than 70%. It took 14 years to recover, to give people kind of an idea of how inflated it actually was. There's so much fiber that sat dark for so long. And you go through a few of these technological changes and you start to become maybe a little bit of a skeptic, maybe look at overinvestment into these things as perhaps people are pouring in too much money and not getting the value out of it. And I think, over the years, the technology graveyard is just littered with technologies that never made it and were unsuccessful or were just a flash in the pan. Nobody talks about Flash anymore, which was a product on the net, which everybody had to have at the time. And these technologies came and went, and then you had other technologies that never really took off. For example, I don't think blockchain and Bitcoin, those sorts of things have really taken off, other than just as a alternative currency. I don't know too many people that actually use blockchain, for example, in business practice. So when AI came out a few years ago, you start to question that. Most people in the audience probably know that AI has been out for more than 50 years, at least the concept of it. So it's nothing new. It's just kind of refreshed and brought back up over and over. But it turns out, I think, as time has passed, people become less of a skeptic, especially with people that have taken a deep dive into it. But I'll say 2 years ago, I looked at it and just kind of thought it was a pile of trash. Couldn't get what I wanted out of it, or it was too much trouble to get what I wanted out of it. And so I was in what I would call the skeptic phase. And from skepticism, I tend to go back and retry things. So maybe every 6 months I'd play around with it, see if it had gotten any better. And lo and behold, one of those times I was trying it again, I found out that it actually was able to drive things that surprised me. In this particular case, I was taking a bread recipe and asking it to cut it in half, and it properly divided the tablespoons into 1.5 teaspoons, which surprised me a little bit. So at that point, I figured, well, they've got it to a point now where you can actually do something with it. And then jumped in with both feet and really started seeing what we could do with it, business-wise as well. So I went from a skeptic to somebody who believed it can do a lot. And I think, it's easy to overestimate what it'll do. So in my mind, you kind of go through this curve where you start out with skepticism, and then you're pretty much wowed by it. And then perhaps you're overwowed by it, where you believe it can do more than it can actually do. And I think more recently, we've seen a lot of that with a lot of the headlines that come out, everybody talking about how efficient can make you. And I don't dispute that. I believe applied correctly, it can, but it's easy to overestimate it if you don't put everything in place that needs to occur to actually get that type of efficiency out of it. So I think after you go through that excitement phase, you get pulled back down to reality, where you get into actual execution and whatnot, and you start running into I'll just say issues with roadblocks that don't allow you to get 100x or 50x productivity. You're really going to see something, I believe, less than that. And I'm not saying it won't ultimately get there, but I'd say a good marker today would be, if you weren't using it at all, to fully adopt it and extremely proficient. You should be able to see a 3 to 5x productivity with it, at least in the development world, which is what we primarily focused on.
So do you have thoughts on sort of leveraging AI as a personal productivity tool, leveraging it in a team versus making it something that's truly kind of enterprise level effective?
Well, I think, from our perspective, our goal internally, we have internal and external goals. Our internal goals are really to leverage it to produce better product for our customers and more quickly. So how can we as an organization, again, we're primarily a development shop, how do we become more efficient with it? And it really requires more than just using the tools. There's a lot more to it than just using tools. It comes down to using AI and thinking about AI in a way that how that leverage is going to take you to a new level. And that requires, I would say, a transformation in the way you work. So a lot of people talk about the software development lifecycle, the SDLC, but to me, it's becoming the AI PLC, which is strictly a product lifecycle, i.e. the concept of developers sitting down and writing code tends to go away. And you got to get the right people in a room. You have to create a small pot of people to actually make it happen. If it's too large, yes, it's a problem. If it's too small, it's a problem. And if you don't do that, you allow the developers just to work as they've always worked, what we find is you get maybe a 30% productivity lift. So by restructuring the way you work, you see these huge productivity lifts. And that's not just true in software development. I think that's true no matter how you choose to use AI. So from a carrier perspective, for example, they are going to have to substantially rethink the way they perform work to truly leverage it. They've probably got more issues adopting it than we do simply because of governance issues and, proper usage issues. They got to be a little bit careful about how they use it because the regulators will really get at them with improper usage. So they need to be very careful on how they structure that usage. But I would say AI not improperly used, not fully leveraged, because we view it strictly as a tool. You don't employ that tool correctly, you're going to get a pretty small lift out of it. If you rethink the entire process and you employ that tool correctly, that's when you see the 3x, the 5x productivity gains.
Right. So I guess one question I have is, I don't have data on this, but I get a sense that typically a lot of process improvements come because someone gets frustrated or someone recognizes a better way to do something. So it tends to be sort of, things that bubble up. It sounds like what you're describing a bit is sort of being strategic from the top down. Am I hearing you correctly, or not, or is it maybe a bit of both?
I always think it's a bit of both. I think trying to do anything top down, command and control, you can take that so far. I think you can set the strategic directive, but it's the people that actually have to make it work. And if you don't allow it to bubble up, and the people don't buy into it, and if you just kind of command it from the top down, I don't think they necessarily will buy into it because there's a lot of fear around it. I think the AI industry has kind of done themselves some own harm by saying, you're not going to need all the people to do the work anymore. Every technological advance that's ever occurred, there might be, there's not really a dip in unemployment, there's a shift in employment. So you shift from one item to another. So saying that all these layoffs occur because of AI, I think is a little bit harmful. And I think it creates a lot of uncertainty and fear in the people that actually have to adopt it. So I think what needs to happen is people, where it needs to bubble up from, what will wind up happening is, and what we've seen happen is, the AI will kind of surface or bring to the forefront what the problems are, i.e., you're operating in a certain way and you've been successful in operating that way, but now you want to become more efficient. Well, why aren't you becoming more efficient? Well, in software, I think developers, for example, have a tendency to want to start coding before they truly understand or fully vet the problem. When you bring in AI, which is, not technically intelligent, I know they call it intelligence, but if you don't lay every little detail out for it, you're going to get an improper result. So what does it surface? It surfaced the fact that somebody wants to start coding before they probably should. It surfaced the fact that maybe the developers or the business analysts don't fully comprehend and understand the problem. So this is kind of the stuff that has to bubble up from the bottom. I think the individual resources have to recognize these problems before they're going to truly be able to leverage it. And if they don't recognize those problems or they don't make that shift in the way they work, what winds up happening is they just get a relatively minor productivity enhancement out of it. And sure, it'll enhance it, write this little routine for me, do this or that, or the next thing for me. You get these small bumps in productivity, and I'm not discounting them. A lot of people will be very happy with 30% hike in productivity. But if there's a way to get 3x, which is 10 times as much out of it, you are going to have to shift the way you work. So, I would say from bottom up, you need that, but I think there's an additional component. So it can't just be top down or bottom up. And what we've done and what I think organizations really need to do is have champions. And these are people who've done it, who've proven that they can get these types of gains, and they need to work with the other people of the organization and coach them on how to make it happen. Because I don't think organically the people, the rank and file, if you will, or the typical worker is going to have that aha moment where they realize that what they've been doing for the last 10, 15, or 20 years is wrong. They've been successful at it. So they have to have what I call a mindset shift. And they can't think about it. They can't think about the problems the same way. And for somebody to do that on their own I'll say an individual or a small group area in the organization, they need a catalyst to actually make it happen. So finding what we call the champions who kind of been there, done that, been successful, and actually made it happen, having them actually work with the teams. That I don't think, you can try training and maybe training work, but I think if actual problems, go through those problems and perform the work so you can see how it's done, and then take and repeat that process over and over again is how you affect change. And to me, it's a very effective way. You can do the training. I think that a lot of people tend to go back to the default. So by bringing in a catalyst, and which is this third party, and you may have plenty of them right in your organization. I'm not saying you necessarily have to go out find an AI consultant. You probably, for any size organization, there's probably a group of people who just have already spent a tremendous amount of time playing around with this stuff on their own, kind of know what the pitfalls are and how to make it effective not only for themselves but for the entire organization. So,
how often do you find that prospective clients come to you with what they think is a technology problem, but it's really a process problem, and how do you help them through that?
It happens far more than you'd think. I don't, a lot of people want to make it a technology problem, and for good reason. I don't blame them. We've always been what I'll call a business first organization. It's business should drive technology, not vice versa. And that's not as fun for the technologists because they don't get to play with the latest, greatest new shiny toy that's out there. But technology, again, it's a tool. You need to think about the business and the business problems. You need to solve those problems, and then technology can help you perhaps solve them more quickly, add more efficiency, and so on. So I would say it happens more times than you would expect. It's many times It simply is. It can be a culture problem. It can be a process problem. Um, various organization problems are many times what are the reason things aren't moving forward the way they should.
Do you have any thoughts on, particularly with the LLMs that are available now, on trying to take advantage of frontier models to potentially, maybe get more than 3 to 5x if you can figure out innovative ways to leverage them versus maybe, using models that are 6 months or a year old and a little bit cheaper to leverage, and maybe in some ways can be managed to be, I mean, obviously they're not going to be deterministic, but closer to something deterministic, but still gives a lot of leverage.
Well, I think different models have different uses. I do think that people tend to select models perhaps that too sophisticated of models. It's very easy to say, well, I need the best model for everything, and you can use the best model for everything. You're not, in my mind, then spending your AI dollars wisely, because all the AI, all the major players, these all are selling tokens, and the tokens are driven by the model. So you might be using 15 tokens for your frontier model and 3 tokens for theoretically a less capable model. In many cases, those less capable models are perfectly capable of solving the problem at hand. I'll actually ask the various chatbots, which model should I be using to solve this problem before, and I'll leave it on instant, for example, in the case of ChatGPT, and say, should I be using the heavy, the light, or the medium model to solve this particular problem? And then it'll answer it. You're not paying anything for the instant model. So I think it's a good way to evaluate that, because you can burn through so many dollars so quickly. If everybody's just doing simple queries on the heaviest of models. We had one person who in the organization was just effectively querying the web and was, on our leaderboard. And when I look at the leaderboard of AI credits, it's not a good thing. It's like, are you making efficient use of those dollars? Because it's easy to spend a lot of money on AI. So I think, yes, the short answer is you can use the frontier models. You should use the frontier models, but you should be very selective in how you use them. On the deterministic problem, I believe that a lot of people really want deterministic outcomes. The advantage of AI is it doesn't necessarily deliver deterministic outcomes. You can push it one direction or another. And in a case like that, our thought is that really you should be using AI to build more deterministic solutions. And if you do that, then you'll get the deterministic answers you need, and you're not constantly exercising the models and increasing your spend that way. So it can be more budget friendly, I would say, plus you get the outcomes that you're expecting. So I would think along those lines, not just let's use LLMs because they're there, i.e. for the sake of technology. Let's solve the problem. Let's come up with a deterministic solution if that's possible. If it's not possible, and there's certainly plenty of cases where either it's not economical to do so or it's not possible to do so, that's when you use the LLM consistently to solve those types of problems. So I think, you got to look at your problem categories, and, AI is kind of like an onion. You've got machine learning kind of in the fore, at least that's the way I think of it. And then you have your LLMs on the outside of that, on the outside layers, and you can select any one of those types of AI, if we will, to solve the various problems. But it really comes down to let's let's solve the problem correctly, and let's use AI where it's meant to be used. I wouldn't be using an LLM to perform arithmetic functions to do it. It's just kind of pointless.
Right. So if you were to put the hat on of someone who's either the CEO or in executive leadership at a carrier or a large broker, and maybe they've tried some pilots with differing levels of success, maybe they haven't done anything and they're getting, FOMO. How would you suggest they start? Do they think about just trying to get some pilots in place? Do they think about the outcomes they want to achieve over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and then kind of go from that strategy to mapping technology? Do they find those champions? Do they put committees together? What do you suggest they do?
Well, first off, I can tell you what our journey was. And, we went through an adoption phase to begin with, i.e., let's get our entire staff familiar with AI. And you get what I call kind of 1,000 balloons. Everybody's writing their own little GPTs and they're, trying out all kinds of things. You're not going to get productivity lift in that phase. So if you're going to take that route, what I would suggest is you kind of put a time constraint on it. And then after you've reached that point of adoption, the next step in my mind is you want to get down to brass tacks and measurement. In our case, we wanted to limit it to a specific number of use cases. So we created kind of an AI board where all the projects were out there. We found out what those projects were, and we limited it because I think for companies that attempt to do, there's been plenty of studies where companies that attempt to take on too many initiatives, they tend to all fail. You want to keep it probably to 3 and under, especially if you're just getting started, because your organization will become spread too thin. You'll not take them to conclusion and so on. So what I would suggest is, if you're planning on rolling out to your org, you go through an adoption phase, then it's key that you have metrics. It's really important to be able to measure the gains. And I think a lot of organizations skip this step or don't take this step. And again, there have been studies, especially in software development, where developers were predicting that they're getting 20% productivity lift with AI, when in reality it was a 20% deficit in productivity. So you've got a 40% gap between reality and perceived value. And to me, that's absolutely huge when you think about it. For a development shop, that's 40 points of margin effectively that you're losing out on. So I think measurement is absolutely critical. So ideally, if you already have measures in place, certain processes that aren't terribly efficient in your organization, you can start with those, and then you can see the real benefit of the AI and what it's producing. And you probably have to measure it in a couple of directions. It's not just about the productivity gain. You also have to be concerned about accuracy and so on. So I think, you put together these key performance indicators and use those key performance indicators to determine whether or not that pilot is being successful, and then you can broadly roll it out to the organization. So I do think that having the champions involved, I think creating a small board, if you don't have the resources to do something larger, is a great idea. And get those people together, pick your few projects, and execute and measure is, in my mind, extremely important.
Do you have a point of view on technology leadership, whether it's in a software shop like yours, or whether it's kind of the technology team? I know I'm generalizing too much because there's more nuances than that, but the technology team that's more of a shared service or a cost center within a carrier or a type of organization.
Yeah, carriers, MGAs, you can view technology in one of two ways. It's a cost center. To me, any modern corporation absolutely has to have some kind of technology center, at least some decision-making process around technology. So any organization should have that. The question becomes, well, how much time do you want to devote to what? Because there never seems to be enough IT resources to satisfy the desired business needs. So it is important to weigh the value of the initiatives and what you're going to get out of them, because IT resources are scarce. Really doesn't matter how many you have. I've not come across organization that says, well, we're overflowing with IT resources and we get done whatever we want, whenever we want. That may change, but we're not there yet or today. So I would say that all these teams should have technology teams. And I do think it's important to bring in the business users, because the business users, that's in many cases the customer for these technology teams. So, bringing them in these discussions at the appropriate times, I think is important and go a long way towards ensuring that your IT spend is satisfying your customer and taking the business to where it needs to go.
Great. Well, Kurt, appreciate the time and the insights. Anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
No, all I would say is if organizations haven't really begun adopting AI, or if you're still a skeptic, I would try and do some personal things with it. Have it assist you in doing really simple things. If you're too much of a laggard, I do believe that it will be very hard to catch up if you allow yourself to slip too far behind. So I would just say, don't ignore it. Don't try and sweep it under the rug if you haven't already begun adoption.
All right, great. Well, Kurt Diederich, Chief Executive Officer of Finesse, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the InsurTech Leadership Podcast.